Wonderful. Okay, so my name is Michelle Clayford. I'm currently an independent celebrant. Been working for a couple of years with the Association of Independent Celebrants and also with the Celebrant Circle. But prior to that, I was a coroner's officer, and that was with West Yorkshire Police for about 7 years, so from 2007 until 2014. And my role there was as emergency call taker and emergency dispatcher, but also as a coroner's officer for the last 2 years. My job involved investigating sudden and unexplained deaths. I dealt with referrals from hospitals, GPs, hospices, international deaths, people coming in. Obviously explaining quite complex and difficult information, medical information to families as well, so that people understood, because it's really important that you understand what's going on. I also performed court duties for the inquests and created and maintained files for them as well. So yeah, so today I'm going to give you a quick overview really of what a coroner is and what they do, because it's a bit of a mystery, I think, for most people. Unless you've actually had dealings with the coroner, you have no idea what they do. So for some reason, my screen has crashed, which is great. Just give me a second.
Okay, take your time.
I'm so sorry. Bear with me. Why are you not working? Right, okay. So, in terms of the coroner, you may have heard this term, a hue and a cry, and some people have, maybe there's a band named after it, we just don't really know what it means. But in back in the 13th century, raising a hue and a cry was essentially around making an awful lot of noise if you saw somebody stealing. So it was about being able to, as a group of people, stop somebody that was stealing. That was the idea of it. However, it also was used as something for people to shout because they found a body. So it's basically getting the attention of the local law enforcement who would have been around at the time, because obviously we didn't have mobile phones and things. There was none of that. It was just literally shouting and screaming. So that's kind of what it meant. But historians have also said that it also was about, saying if something had happened and you weren't happy with the outcome in terms of criminal outcomes, you could also still raise a hue and a cry. But yeah, it's also to do with coroners. Okay, so who and what is a coroner? It is a bit of a mouthful. So His Majesty's Coroner, obviously previously was Her Majesty's Coroner. They're an independent judicial officer, office holder, and they are appointed by the local authority, i.e. the council, to investigate sudden, unexplained or unnatural deaths. And the key word there is independent. Coroner's officers.
It's okay, Alan. Yeah.
So myself, I was employed by West Yorkshire Police. Other counties would they'd actually be employed by the council. So for West Yorkshire, we had an interesting split with the administrative side of things was employed by the council, and the coroner's officers were employed by the police, which caused some difficulties at times, because obviously everything is it doesn't run as smoothly if it's a different organisation for a start. But yeah, whole heaps of things. So what is a coroner? Coroners are older actually than criminal law. Coroners were created in England in 1194. It's something that has been mentioned in the Magna Carta. A coroner is usually a doctor or a lawyer, sometimes both. And it's it started off as common law, not a civil law, and they were employed by the local kind of magistrates and the local people, but it would often be the local doctor, because quite frankly there wasn't the big infrastructure that we have now, so it'd be the local person that would be dealing with all of the medical issues as well as any potential suspicious circumstances. There are a couple of reference books. This is one of them, which you may not hold on. So, because I've got my blur on, might not be see it very well, but it's a book by Christopher Dorries called Coroner's Courts, and it's a guide to law and practice. There's also one by Jarvis. Different coroners have different preferences for those books. I bought that before I was employed because I was that eager to to get involved, but I think my coroner actually preferred Jarvis and not Dorries, but never mind. It's relatively easy to understand. Obviously, it's very wordy, but it is useful to just have an overview of what coroners do. It's very in depth in terms of the laws, and you can see it's quite a hefty book. So there is a lot of there's a lot in there to explain why certain things are done in certain ways. So back in the day, the coroner initially gathered taxes. So they were very much about the money, but they then were moved into exploring deaths because they were independent. They were seen as someone that would be able to do that, and they were traveling around the country anyway. It made sense to do it. This image is, it's quite an interesting one. Obviously, still, to a certain extent, most coroners are male, but there is a lot more diversity now than there used to be. But back in the day, it would obviously have been white men that were in that position of power, and they would hold court or examine bodies in pubs, so public houses. Literally by the name, as it would explain, is a public place, and it was usually the biggest place locally that everybody could gather. A bit like how barbers didn't just used to cut beards, they also used to offer medical service like dentists and like dental work and sewing up, small cuts and things because there weren't lots of other people around. Yeah, so this particular image that I found kind of shows the coroner as a bit of a portly chap with the red cheeks, indicating potentially a little bit of alcohol, and they were seen very much as drunkards back in the day. I don't think that's still the case, but I think because they frequented pubs so much, that's probably why. So in terms of the role of a coroner, the role of a coroner is to establish 5 things, and these are really important, not just for families and for people who know them, but for the government to record certain bits of information. So we need to know who it is that's died, their name, where they come from. We need to know where they've died. Sometimes it's not immediately obvious. It might be that someone's gone into the river and has been washed up many miles away. It might be that somebody has been killed at one spot and then moved, the body's been moved, so we need to establish all of that. We need to know when they've died. A little side note on this, the time of death that is recorded on a death certificate is not necessarily the time that somebody died. So the time of death that's on the death certificate is the time that a doctor or other medical professional that's fully trained has established, they've said, right, recognition of life extinct, this person is dead. So even if we come across a skeleton, which, have dealt with cases of that where people have been dead for many, many months, the time of death is, let's say, today, 11/13, and the 9th of January 2025, even though it's clearly obvious that that person didn't die then. Right. So if you're with somebody and they died with you at 10:30 this morning, you know when they died, but their time of death is going to be different. So it's really important that people understand that, because that can also cause a bit of confusion. We then need to know how they died. So yeah, what's caused that? I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail. And then we need to know why. So was this natural or was it unnatural? Because that changes the course of the investigation. So the responsibilities of the coroner is to investigate sudden and unexplained deaths, to investigate violent deaths. They're also responsible for treasure. So if you have got one of those like metal detectors and you come across some ancient, wonderful looking treasure on the beach, that has to be reported. And then that goes to the coroner to investigate. In my time there, we didn't have any, I've never had any. And I think there may have been one in the time that the people that I worked with at the time had dealt with the treasure inquest, but you know, it does happen occasionally. If you die abroad, then if the body's cremated abroad, nothing to do with the coroner because it's not a body anymore. If you're coming back into the country to be buried, that is to do with the coroner because it's a body. We need to know where it's going, why it's coming in. We can't just have bodies lying around doing whatever they want to do. It's not okay. We need to know what's happening and why. The coroner's then responsible for an inquest, which is a public inquiry into why someone's died, and we look back at those 5 things to establish what's happened and then come to a conclusion at the end of that. Inquests happen in 2 different ways. So sometimes it's just the coroner and other times it's a jury inquest. So if you ever get jury service, you may be called to a criminal court or you may be called to the coroner. Because we need sometimes certain deaths will go to a jury inquest, like a prison death, or if it's a really big event like Manchester bombings or Lockerbie, those kind of things, they will go to a jury inquest because it's a lot, and we need more independent inquiry on that. Sometimes the coroner will give a narrative verdict, which is a lengthy explanation of their findings. Other times it will be, I've determined this is an accidental death. That's all it is. You won't get much more. But if it's a narrative verdict, there's a lot more on there. The coroner also has responsibilities around the Human Rights Act because Article 2 is about the right to human life, and this is why the coroners have to investigate as much as they do because we need to know what's going on. They're also responsible for the Human Tissue Act and the retention of tissue. So I'm going to come on to that in a second. And the key thing that I'm going to go back to is an independent investigation. This is not tied to any political or financial bias. They should always be completely independent, as is the forensic pathologist and the pathologist. We'll come into it in a second. So for some people, they've never had anything to do with the coroner. For other people, it will come at a really difficult time for them. It might be that their loved one has fallen on the ice, for example, died at the scene, been taken to hospital and then pronounced at the hospital. That is going to go to the coroner because it's an unnatural death. If you die at home in your bed and you had a history of heart disease and you've been feeling very unwell recently and the doctor's seen you like last week, then that wouldn't be referred to the coroner because it's a natural death. You died of heart issues. So if somebody collapses and dies and we don't know why they've died, that will be referred to the coroner because we have to establish why. If it was an accident, so road traffic collision, you've fallen out of a window, fallen on the ice and hit your head, those kind of things, again, going to be referred to the coroner. It's an unnatural death. If someone's died of a drug overdose, it's coming to the coroner. If you as a family have concerns about the care of somebody, or you just think it's just a bit suspicious, it's not right, I'm not happy about this, then you can contact the coroner's office and say, do you know what, I'm not happy. Dave died last night. I feel like there's something going on. I have a few concerns, like he's been having arguments with his girlfriend recently, and I'm just a bit worried. Even though it looks like it's natural, I'm not sure. We would look at that because we have to. If someone has died from a recent operation or following a recent operation, that will get referred to the coroner as well, because there's possible neglect or things that have gone wrong within that operation. Yeah. If you feel that someone has been neglected, so it might be a child, it might be somebody in the care system, it might be somebody in a care home. If you feel that a neglect has contributed to their death, that can come to the coroner. And again, you can just contact us. If you have those concerns, please do it before a cremation occurs, because it's pretty much impossible to establish anything at that point if a cremation has occurred, because there's no body to examine. The other thing is if someone's found in the community. So yeah, you find someone on the street, or someone has been found by their mum, and it's just not obvious, that comes to the coroner. So what happens next? So the next thing is a post-mortem. But what would happen is, from my end, I would get a phone call, either from the police or from the doctor at the hospital to say, right, Philip's died. We don't really know why. Often we would also deal with under 24 hours. So if someone had come into A&E and died within 24 hours, so they're in hospital, that comes to the coroner as well, because it was also like a community death. So then we'd have to examine the body. So you can't just go ahead and do that. You need permission. So yeah, we get the phone call, I take details, speak to the coroner and say, right, these are the circumstances. This is what's happened. What do you want to do? And usually the coroner would say, well, if you've done your inquiries, there's no GP that's seen them within 14 days. We don't really know what's going on. It's not obviously suspicious, anything like that. Let's get a PM done, and then we can go from there. So then the body, I will tell the hospital, yes, go ahead. We'll fax paperwork over, because again, you can't do anything with a body that you shouldn't be doing unless someone knows what you're doing. Like, it's not okay. It's a criminal offence to interfere with a dead person, and also not to bury a body appropriately. There's all sorts of rules around this for good reason. So we need to make sure that bad things aren't happening out there. So that's when a post-mortem happens. And this is where a pathologist, who is a doctor that specialises in examining dead bodies, or the lack thereof of a dead body, because that's another thing that can happen. We might just get a foot that's found, or different body parts. We have to establish, is this something that someone could have survived? Is this something that actually we think this person is still alive, or they might be dead? Yeah, there's a whole thing around that as well. Doesn't happen very often, but it does. So the pathologist in the mortuary in the hospital would examine the body. This is where you have a Y cut, so down the scapula and down through the chest, to open the body and examine inside and see what they can find. In certain circumstances, so certainly in Muslim deaths and in Jewish deaths and some others, religiously, people want to be buried immediately, really, within 24 hours. Now, this causes some tension. If it's quite clear that there's something that's happened that shouldn't have happened, or it's suspicious, we may have to hold on to the body for a lot longer, because it's not going to be possible to get everything done within 24 hours. And that, the coroner was as sensitive as possible as they could be around that, but essentially the coroner has a job to do. So yeah, it is not always possible. Some people really don't want a post-mortem, and I would have liaised with the family and with the coroner at that point to say that the family really don't want this. Is there any other way around it? We can, in certain circumstances, you can have an MRI. But obviously MRIs are there for people who are living and have, medical issues that need to be dealt with kind of, urgently. In that case, it's a case of waiting for an MRI to be free. Certain places do offer an MRI now as a standard, but it just depends where you are. They're huge machines, they're incredibly expensive. It's not something that happens all the time. If it's not immediately obvious why someone's died at the post-mortem, then we might take some tests. So that's when a pathology tests are taken, so small samples of certain organs to be looked at under a microscope. Also toxicology, so certain bodily fluids like blood and urine, and they would be taken, labelled appropriately, and then we know what's happened. So then we get a report from the pathologist to say, these are my findings. I don't know. At this point, we've got no idea. Right, okay. So then I have to go back to the coroner. So this is what happens then. So is the death natural? Is it not really obvious why someone's died? They've got cancer, heart disease, kidney failure, caused by a history of those medical things, in which case that if the doctor is happy to say, yes, this is the cause of death, then you'll get on the death certificate, which I'll show you in a little bit, one cause of death, and then it will be underneath that caused by. We'll go through that in a second. Is it an unnatural death? So has somebody shot themselves or been shot? Have they got a head injury? Have they fallen down the stairs? All those kind of things. C, is it unknown? So we then need to do further investigations. And then D, if the death is suspicious or criminal, then we go from there. So, so we have a natural cause of death. So the pathologist is going to issue a report, as I said. The coroner will then issue the notification to the registrars to say, okay, this is fine. And the green is issued. Dave will go into the green in a moment. And then the body is going to be released to the funeral director for burial or cremation. So at this point, I'm liaising with all of these different people to say, right, this is okay, that's okay. Where do you want the body to go? Do you want, a cremation or burial? Not sure yet. That's fine, because we then may need to issue a cremation certificate, or we may need to issue something for burial. It's just for the coroner. The family are then free to register the death, and the registrars will issue a death certificate. So if we're on B and it's an unnatural cause of death, so it was self-inflicted, so someone's killed themselves, or it's a head injury, it's going to go to an inquest. So the pathologist is going to issue the report that states this is what it is, and then we're going to open and adjourn an inquest in court. The coroner will issue interim death certificates, and these work as a death certificate for the family to go ahead and do what they need to do. And I will then contact the undertakers, and the body will be released. They'll collect it from the mortuary and go from there. The inquest will then be adjourned until we have all the information, so we can then present the full case. So the last part here, if any organs were retained for further investigations, the family can decide to wait to have the funeral until the deceased is complete, i.e. brain, whatever has come back back with the body, so the person is whole, and then they may feel more comfortable in having a funeral, or they may decide to go ahead and have cremation or burial for the person, and then either donate the organs to medical science or have a separate service for that body part as well. That's probably one of the hardest parts of this for me, was having to explain to families that I'm really sorry, your loved one has died as a result potentially of epilepsy or some kind of brain injury. That means we have to keep the whole brain. So heart, liver, kidneys, you can take slices, the histopathology, but if it's a brain issue, the whole brain has to be taken. And for some people, some families, that's incredibly difficult, understandably. So yeah, very difficult conversations about that. Okay, so if we don't know what's happened, so if the pathologist is like, do you know what, honestly, there's nothing here that explains why this person has died, then again, same thing. Inquest opened and adjourned, interim death certificates issued, body is then released for a funeral, and the inquest will resume. And same thing about organs. So if it's unknown, you probably are going to have histopathology and toxicology. They can take quite a while to come back from testing. So it's not a quick process. So if the death is suspicious or criminal, it's slightly different. So this is where I would have been called in the middle of the night to say, right, Michelle, we've got a body. This will be by the police. They will have put a scene guard up. There'll be police everywhere, getting investigation sorted, trying to arrest somebody. And I then have to rate the coroner and go, right, I'm really sorry, sir, we've got a body. What do you want me to do? And the coroner will either say at that point, whether it's 3 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right, we need an immediate forensic pathology post-mortem. So I have to contact the forensic pathologist to get them out of bed, agree where we're going to go. It would normally be at Pinderfields, this side. And we would all convene there, not the coroner. So it would be myself, the forensic pathologist, the police, so the senior investigating officer, and the mortuary techs as well. And then we would conduct a forensic post-mortem. It's very similar to a post-mortem. However, we need as much evidence as possible gathering. If it's during the daytime, I would go and collect medical records from the GP so that the pathologist can have a look at them. And then it's much more of a waiting game. So we would get an immediate kind of cause of death from the forensic pathologist there. So either don't know or, yeah, blunt force trauma to the head or gunshot wound, those kind of things. And then we wait, because this then goes back to the police, and they have to conduct all of their inquiries and satisfy they have all their suspects. At that point, if there's more than one suspect, each of those suspects has the right to a forensic post-mortem to take place. So the body could have up to, as many, 5, 6, 7. Some of those suspects with their solicitors may agree, do you know what, we're not going to get any more information. So we're happy to accept the findings from, A's kind of post-mortem, but sometimes it will go through many. There was one case, and this poor person had been at the mortuary for years and had many post-mortems, and there was nothing really left of her to examine, and it was awful, because it just, it was an awful situation all round. But coroner and the police weren't happy, weren't satisfied. Investigations had to continue. Once the police have finished their inquiries and they are satisfied there's nothing else that can be done at that point, then the coroner again is going to open and adjourn an inquest. However, it's going to be adjourned to criminal court, and then the criminal court will go ahead and do their thing. As long as there's nothing further that needs to be investigated, our inquest would be adjourned, completely closed, because everything's been investigated at criminal court. So there's nothing else to do. The family would still have had interim death certificates at that point. So, yeah. Okay, so here you can see on the left side we have the coroner's death certificate, so the interim death certificate, and then on the right we've got the normal kind of death certificates. They do look slightly different. The colour of them is different, and then you've also got down here the precise medical cause of death. So we don't know. And on the obviously some of the information is the same, the name of and date of birth and the place of birth, address, etc. I don't know if you can see, yeah. Nope. I can't zoom in, but here on the right it says cause of death 1A, respiratory depression, 1B, combined toxicity of what does that say? Zolpidem and ethanol, and the conclusion is suicide. So you might have 1A and 1B like that, but you might also have a 2 underneath, which will have the underlying cause of death as well. So in terms of this is another photo I found of amazing like history, really, of some officers taking a body through. So in 1846, the Coroners Act basically said that a coroner could order a dead body be deposited in the nearest public house, the nearest pub, until an inquest can be held. So at this point, pubs, A, they were the largest kind of social gathering place, but B, they were really cold because they'd have the kind of beer cellars underneath. So that's where bodies were stored, and eventually got to the point where they'd have marble tables downstairs so that they could actually, a coroner could actually go ahead and have an inquest there. So it was the jury of 12. I don't actually know the history of why it's 12, but yeah, because the same in criminal court. Sometimes the inquest would take place at the home of the deceased, but the other thing is that in pubs you'd have sawdust on the floor, which meant that obviously that would, soak up bodily fluids. Yeah, so that's that. And then now an inquest, it can take many months. It can sometimes even take years, which is not ideal for anybody, especially for a family that's, that's waiting for answers. Sometimes it can be a very straightforward affair. So we would sometimes do something unusual in Leeds, which was a take through. So if someone had died, they had medical history in terms of the GP knew what was going on, or the consultant did, but they hadn't seen them within 14 days. If they were happy to write a report to say what had happened, then the coroner would take the report in lieu of the post-mortem. So we could then do everything at once. So we would open the inquest, we'd examine all the evidence, and then give the verdict. So that was what we called a take through, but I don't know that it doesn't, I don't know if it still happens. It wasn't like a normal thing to happen, but it was something that could happen. The most important thing is there shouldn't be any surprises for the family at the inquest. So you should have communication from the coroner's officer to tell you what's happening, to tell you the results as they come in. So at no point should you be sat at the inquest going, well, I didn't know that Bob, had a drinking problem. I didn't know that such and such did X, Y, Z. It's like, well, yeah, it's sometimes quite difficult as well. So there were situations where, and I know that David will understand this, you'd have a phone call from a family member saying, well, my partner died and blah, blah, blah. And they're saying that they're the next of kin. And then you'd get a phone call from another person saying that they actually were this person's legal partner. And that was quite difficult to navigate. Because you've got to establish who actually has the right to deal with this case. So yeah, it's quite sensitive.